Hey folks, today I'm going to be replacing the rear prop shaft on this Discovery 3 2007. The issue with the current drive shaft is that the centre bearing is gone. That's this fella in here. So it's not a hugely expensive part to replace the whole thing. It's about 190 plus VAT, and that's the brick part. So I'm just going to pop out the old one and put this one in. First thing to do is get it jacked up good and high and put in your jack stands. Make sure it's safe for you to go underneath. You can take out the fuse for the air suspension to make sure it doesn't try and level itself and come down on top of you on one side. And then we're going to go underneath. Underneath now we have to remove this guard that protects the centre of the drive shaft. There are 5 nuts and bolts, and it'll pop off. You can now see our drive shaft. The issue with this shaft is the centre support bearing. It is gone. So to remove the drive shaft, we have 4 bolts at the rear of the vehicle where it joins onto the diff. We have 2 13mm bolts on the support, the carrier bearing in the centre. And then at the very front we have 6 bolts holding it onto the transfer box. The bolts at the front of the drive shaft holding it onto the transfer box are an E12. That's a 6-point female Torx. If you don't have that socket, you can use a 10mm 12-point ordinary hex socket. At the back on the diff end is an E14, and if you don't have that socket you can use an 11mm 12-point. So we're going to loosen off all the bolts now. They're not too tight, you'll be able to do them by hand with an ordinary ratchet. We're going to reuse these bolts. You can get new ones if you want, but there's no need. So I'm going to take out the 6 at the front, the 4 at the back, and the 2 in the middle. And then we're going to take out the drive shaft. So here we have the prop shaft out of the vehicle now, and we're comparing it with the new one. Getting the prop shaft out was a couple of little awkward things. The 4 bolts at the diff end, very tight, so I had to use a breaker bar to get them loose. To get the shaft out then, we had to drop down the middle 2 bolts on the carrier bearing, and that gave us enough room. The back end will pry off very easily. The front end was a different story. The shaft itself was seized pretty much onto the transfer case, so we had to split the joint and tap it off with a chisel and hammer. Here's the centre bearing, carrier bearing. The rubber has delaminated from its support and the bearing feels a little bit rough. Down at the U-joint end, the U-joint in both directions feels quite notchy, so it's no harm to replace everything. Now we just have to put the new one in. So we have our prop shaft in now. We have the 6 E12 bolts at the front tightened up, the 2 13mm on the carrier bearing, and the 4 E14s at the back end. So next we're going to just put on the cover again and tighten it up, and that'll be us finished. You should use a torque wrench to set the correct torque on all the bolts. The rear bolts onto the diff are 150 Newton meters, which is fairly tight. By rights you probably should replace those bolts as there's a lot of stress on them, but make sure whenever you are replacing them or reusing them to put on a bit of blue thread lock, as it was originally. The middle 2 13mm bolts are rated for 30 Newton meters, and the front or approximately 70 Newton meters. Okay, hopefully that was useful to you. Thanks, bye bye.